Welcome back to Legacy Contracts, and if this is your first time here, we're glad you found us. This channel exists for attorneys who sense that something beneath the surface of their firm isn't quite working, even if it's hard to name. Here, we look beyond surface-level efficiency and into the invisible systems shaping how your firm operates, serves clients, and sustains growth. Through practical insight and honest conversation, we help bring clarity to what's often overlooked, so you can lead with intention, not assumption. If you're interested in building a law firm that's not just functional but thoughtfully designed, you're in the right place. Let's begin. There's a phrase we hear constantly from managing partners and law firm owners: "I've already delegated this." And yet somehow, the same decisions continue returning to them. The same workflows still require oversight. The same bottlenecks keep resurfacing. The same people remain responsible for catching problems before they become visible to clients. So the assumption becomes, maybe the delegation wasn't strong enough. Maybe the team needs more training. Maybe leadership needs to communicate expectations more clearly. But in many firms, the issue is not delegation itself. The issue is that delegation is being used to solve a structural problem. And delegation alone cannot fix a structure that was never designed to hold responsibility consistently in the first place. That's the conversation we want to have today, because most law firms are not struggling with a lack of effort. They're struggling with a lack of structural accountability. And those are two very different things. Most firms believe intervention becomes necessary because something went wrong. A task was missed. A deadline slipped. A client communication wasn't handled properly. A workflow stalled. But if intervention becomes repetitive, it's usually not an isolated operational failure. It's a structural signal, because stable systems should not require constant rescue from leadership to continue functioning correctly. And this is where a lot of firms unintentionally create operational dependence without realizing it. They delegate tasks, but they never transfer ownership. There's a difference. A delegated task says, "Handle this." Structural ownership says, "This decision belongs to you. This responsibility has a defined home. This workflow continues even when leadership is not directly involved." Without that second piece, delegation becomes temporary supervision instead of sustainable accountability. And eventually, everything roots back upward. One of the most common examples of this shows up in client communication. A managing partner notices they are still reviewing emails before they go out, still stepping into conversations, still checking follow-ups, still making sure updates happen. Technically, those responsibilities were delegated already, but the structure around them was never clarified. Who owns communication timing? Who owns escalation? Who owns follow-up standards? Who owns documenting next steps? When those answers remain implied instead of defined, people hesitate. Not because they are incapable, but because the operational authority surrounding the task was never fully transferred. So leadership remains psychologically tied to the workflow. And over time, that creates a dangerous dynamic inside firms: the appearance of delegation without the relief that delegation is supposed to create. The work moved, but the responsibility never actually left leadership. This is why many managing partners feel trapped between two uncomfortable choices: micromanage everything or risk things falling apart. But the real issue usually isn't leadership style. It's operational architecture, because firms that rely on constant intervention often have one thing in common: the system itself does not clearly define where ownership begins and ends. That creates invisible gravity. Decisions pull toward the person the firm trusts most to resolve uncertainty. And in most firms, that becomes the managing partner. Not because they necessarily want it to happen. Because structurally, there's nowhere else for the responsibility to settle. And this is important. Constant intervention can actually hide structural weakness for years, because strong leaders compensate well. They step in quickly. They answer the question. They resolve the issue. They smooth over the inconsistency before anyone else notices it, which means the firm can continue operating while carrying hidden instability underneath the surface. until eventually growth increases pressure, team size expands, client volume rises, or leadership bandwidth shrinks, and suddenly the structure can no longer rely on intervention to stay stable. That's usually the moment firms begin saying things like, "Everything depends on me. I can't step away. I thought we already delegated this. My team is capable, but something still isn't working." And often they're correct. The people may not be the issue at all. The issue may be that the operational structure was never designed to carry accountability independently. So what actually changes this? Not more delegation, structural accountability. And structural accountability has three components that most firms are missing at least one of. The first is named ownership. Every recurring workflow, decision, or responsibility needs a clearly assigned owner. Not a group, not whoever's available, not everyone. One designated point of responsibility. The second is documented authority. If ownership only exists verbally, the structure remains fragile. Authority has to become operationally visible through workflows, processes, documentation, decision pathways, and written expectations. And the third is communicated clarity. Because even documented systems fail when the surrounding team doesn't understand how authority actually functions. When these three pieces are missing, delegation collapses back into supervision. Every time. And we want to be clear, this isn't about creating rigid law firms. It's not about removing flexibility or human judgment. It's about reducing unnecessary dependency on leadership intervention for routine operational stability. There's a difference between leadership involvement and leadership dependency. Healthy firms still require leadership, but stable firms do not require leadership to manually hold together every operational process in real time. One of the biggest mindset shifts firms go through is realizing the goal is not to work harder at accountability. The goal is to build accountability into the structure itself. Because when accountability depends entirely on reminders, follow-ups, and supervision, leadership becomes the operating system of the firm. And that's not scalable. Eventually, the weight becomes unsustainable. This is exactly why we're hosting our upcoming live webinar, Structural Accountability by Design: How to Build a Law Firm That Doesn't Require Constant Intervention. In this session, we're going deeper into 1. Why responsibility keeps returning to leadership. 2. How operational authority actually becomes structural. 3. The difference between supervision and stability. And 4. The first changes firms need to make to stop operating through constant intervention. If this conversation feels familiar to your firm, we think the webinar will connect a lot of the patterns you may already be noticing. Registration link in the description. And if this video resonated with you, we encourage you to also explore the firm assessment. Because many firms already know something feels operationally heavy. The challenge is identifying exactly where the structure is requiring leadership to compensate manually. That's the work we help firms make visible. We hope today's insight helped bring clarity to something that may have been operating quietly in the background of your firm. Progress doesn't always start with doing more. It often starts with seeing more clearly. Law firms aren't built overnight. They're shaped by the decisions you make once the invisible becomes visible. This is Legacy Contracts, and until next time, keep leading with clarity.